Again, good morning, everyone. My name is Angel Whitehead. I am the president for the Heart of Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for being here this morning for Coffee with the Chamber, sponsored by Victor Communications. We are so blessed to have Craig Tim, who also is a board member with the Chamber, speaking today on communications and public relations and sharing some of that insight with us as we dive into this different world that we live in. So as a few reminders, please keep yourself muted unless you have a question. Please use the chat feature if you'd like to put the question in there. I'm happy to read those to Craig as he goes through his presentation. Today's presentation will have Craig talking a little bit, sharing information with us, and then an open roundtable discussion where we can all kind of unmute and give feedback, questions, and items like that. So at that point, I'm going to send it over to Craig, our speaker. So go ahead, Craig.
Good morning, everyone, and it's my pleasure to be here. As Angel mentioned, I want this to be just an open discussion. I have some points that I see, and I'm going to start with giving you my background. I don't want to bore you too much because it's 7:30 in the morning, but again, I appreciate everybody being on here. And it's not bothering me, Angel, but all I can see is this meeting is being recorded in a big white box in front of the camera. So I assume everyone can see me. You can see me fine, right, Angel? Perfect. Public relations and communications, or what I'm going to call this morning, this old guy, meaning me, I can still function in what's now called the web-based world. As a little bit of a background, back in 1985, I started after finishing a year of graduate school. I started as the public information director at Mid-State Technical College, and then added the responsibility for the MSTC Foundation a couple of years later. And I'm really proud to say that I was at the helm, and I take no credit for it, but I was at the helm when Mid-State received a nice, huge gift of $1 million from the Bethke estate. That's back in the mid to late 80s. I spent 11 years there and then received a call from Georgia Pacific, and I'll talk about that in a second. And back then in 1985, it was news releases, voicemails, and I'll call you back. That was kind of the communications world back then. Changed a lot since then. In 96, I began almost 25 years in the paper industry, started with Georgia Pacific. We became Domtar in 2001. I was lucky enough to stay in my hometown area and work based at Port Edwards in the Coosa area, and joined the corporate communications team. We did government relations literally all over the country. For Domtar, I was specifically functioning in multiple states, from Ohio in the east, Illinois south, Minnesota to the west, Wisconsin, and pretty much everything in between. And although it was still what I call voicemails, news releases, and the like, when people ask me what's the main difference from working in an educational technical college system as compared to the paper industry, and the main difference is just the absolute timing. What I mean by that is the paper industry, as we all know, is really 24/7. You could have an incident that happened at 3 in the morning, Eastern time, Central time, Mountain time, whatever. And hopefully things like that don't happen on college campuses so much. I ended that career last September, and they treated me great, as I was part of I was actually affected, in our corporate communications team. We were affected due a little bit COVID and then just business conditions. Domtar is a huge manufacturer for business communication papers. And when you lose a big chunk of your market due to just the environment of business, which I'm going to talk about shortly, it obviously affected a lot of things. And in my case, people. We went from a staff of 6 that literally covered all of the North America to 3. And again, I have nothing but good thoughts of Domtar. They treated me super. What am I doing now? I'm actually working full-time at Herman Taylor Funeral Home. Really enjoy doing that, working with families. I just recently passed my life insurance exam for the state, and I'm doing pre-need. working with folks on planning their services and that type of a thing. And then I also do a multiple jobs there. And I also consult. Victor Communications is not very creative. That's actually my middle name. So that's where we got to that point. I have taught at various places. In fact, starting at Midstate tonight, I taught for Lakeland, but taught for a long time at UW Stevens Point. I taught intro to public relations and also crisis communications. And I want to use a lot of that as a basis for my discussion this morning, because I use the students as a sounding board and kind of like my own research company. And I'd ask them every semester, I said, do you read the news? And when I meant that, I meant everything from traditional news, newspaper, broadcast news, emails, etc. However, and I was kind of surprised that each semester the student, and this was going over 20 years, the students all said, yeah, we do read the news, kind of. And the kind of part is they probably knew a little bit about the national headlines going on, probably heard it mostly on through their phone. But then they also looked at news, but it was very much specific to what they were interested in. If you're in a business, especially something like recreational, healthcare, they are extremely interested in the specifics of what's going on. It's kind of the what is it, how does it affect me type of an approach. And if you think back how we all communicate and how we all read the news and how we all work in public relations, it all comes down to people against people, people with people. It is a people profession. I think a lot of times we're so enamored with technology, and technology is absolutely basically taken over everything in communication. But when you think about it, it really comes down to people to people. And I know that the successful businesses still have at least that approach, and they also still use that as their basis for their continued success. So when I mentioned the students read it kind of, they immediately think about how, and they're of course so caught up into school. I mean, they're kind of in their own fishbowl, so to speak. And we all did it, and completely understand that, whether it's school at all ages. But you also, the minute you hear or read a headline, we all kind of think back and say, how does that impact me directly, or is there anything that happens at that might impact my family? I can remember back when I was in graduate school, I went to Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and after undergrad in University of Southern Colorado, I can remember it was early in the semester. I was getting ready to get to class, and back then, listening to the news on the radio, they mentioned there was actually a fire at the Belmont Residence Hall at the University of Southern Colorado. A lot of damage, actually some effect on human life, sadly to say. And I actually was a resident there probably less than 3 months before I heard that news broadcast. So now today, obviously, that would be all over the internet. Something that I really think we need to keep an eye on and really think about, there are two main organizations that really focus on public relations and business communications. One is PRSA, it's the Public Relations Society of America, based in New York City. And they have a chapter for students, that's PRSSA, Public Relations Student Society of America. And I'm going to use that in a second on one of the studies that they just concluded. The other one is IABC, or the International Association of Business Communicators. And if you are interested in those types of things, they would be glad. I'm not promoting them. I'm a member of PRSA. I'm not promoting it, but if you're interested, they have some wonderful resources of all types, especially as we hopefully move out of the COVID environment. But a very interesting statistic. According to PRSSA, and it's their August, so it's brand new publication called Strategies and Tactics. They did a study and worked with the University of Oxford. 92,000 consumers, out of 92,000 consumers in 46 countries, the United States ranks last in their trust of the media. 29%, according to that statistic, quote, trust the media. I've worked with the media for 30 years, and I highly respect the media. I always ask my students, why is the media even there? And you get all the normal answers of it's for the news, it's for entertainment, it's to sell advertising, etc. But when we communicate, especially publicly, we need to remember that there is really the real reason that the media functions is simply they're a business. They're a business like you are, a business like I am. They are in the business of news. That's their product. And if we kind of think of that when we address the media, we have to remember they're trying to do a job too. They're not there for our enjoyment, although they try to provide. Obviously, nobody would buy their publication if they didn't find a need for it. But when you address things, and especially work with the media, you have to remember that's their job, just like your job. Let's switch to COVID for a second. This I actually found rather, I guess, disturbing. Disturbing isn't the correct word, but the Wall Street Journal reports they talked to 3,000 workers, and this was just in the last couple of months. And those are workers from major companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, those companies. And they asked a very simple question. They said, you have two responses. You can receive a $30,000 per year pay increase. That's response number one. Or you cannot receive the $30,000 pay increase, and you can work from home like you are now in a different environment. And it was about 80% that said we'd rather just continue working from home. Why is that important? Very important. How do you communicate to your employees? How do they communicate to the people they need to work with, et cetera, et cetera? That to me, it might be because of my age, and it might be because of kind of the times that I grew up in. But when you look at that's quite an investment to say, if you come back to the office, it's just a guaranteed $30,000 a year pay increase, whether you're performing at that level or not. And to me, that was just extremely shocking, in lack of a better word. Successful communications, in my opinion, must have, or they must address, several things. The one thing I think that's at the top of the list is what we call reputation management. Some people call it RM. Reputation management. What exactly is that? Reputation management is basically, what are they saying about you out there? What is the public saying about your ABC company? What are they saying about the Heart of Wisconsin Chamber? What are they saying about Victor Communications? What are they saying about, you name it? Why are they saying it? What have you done that might have influenced something, both either in a positive manner or a negative manner? And frankly, can we do anything about it? And how you respond to that, it's very difficult. I know working in a major corporate world, we actually had a full-time person, and it ended up being multiple people. Their total job was reputation management. They had to try at all levels and in multiple countries. Domtar was selling products in 50 countries, based in the eastern United States, based in the Carolinas, just south of Charlotte, had facilities all over the US, all over Canada, all over Europe, 10,000 employees when it was at its largest. And literally they had people trying to, on a daily basis, so actually minute by minute, figure out what people were saying about Domtar all over the world. And that information was reported back through people like myself that were kind of out in the hinterland, so to speak. And we decided early on to say, one, is it something that's credible? Most of the time it absolutely was. It's kind of the old expression, if it's what you think, it's fact, no matter if it really is or not. Also, then we decided, is it worth making any type of a statement, any type of a comment or whatever? And you would really be surprised how difficult it is to decide whether or not you need to even comment. Very difficult. I know in the businesses that you all represent, if it's just yourself, if it's a small business, large business, extremely difficult. And my advice is you again, it's take it case by case, but you have to stand up for yourself. But in some cases, we decided that just kind of let it run its course. And a good example is ask anyone, including me, what'd you have for lunch yesterday? And most of us can't remember because we're in such an evolving type climate right now. And and when you're using the media, for example, let's take a newspaper. It's in print, but let's be honest. A lot of us read it quickly in the morning, if at all. A lot of us know it's in our box at home, or we just literally open the door, throw it in there, say, I'll take a look at it. A couple of days later, there they sit. And then we've gone on to the other news. So you really have to determine, is it worth a response? Now, obviously, if it's a major thing where you're totally been misrepresented, you have to take the action you think it's the best. But we also have to kind of, what I say, forget the quote, no comment type of communication. No comment is, in fact, this is in a textbook. No comment means, whether that's back in the 80s or in 2021, and they actually published this in a couple books, no comment to the public means you're just guilty as hell. Because whether you have a comment or not, the perception is, and again, remember, perception is everything. Perception is that if you have no comment, you're either guilty of something or you are trying to hide something. I can tell you early on in major manufacturing, again, my background was in paper and related forest products type companies, you could get away with that. You just said, we're not going to respond. And you can't do that anymore. It's just not the right thing to do. And it's not right for your company. It's not right for your employees. But what do you do? What do you do if you really don't have a comment? My advice is you answer as much as you can. You try to steer it and get your point of view across without just saying no comment. We've all seen people do that, major people. You look at things like even like presidential elections where the camera is on a particular candidate, and the minute they say something like no comment, it just absolutely destroys the news feed for the day. So what you try to do is you try to say, well, I can't specifically comment about that, but here's what we're doing that relates to that type of a thing. Is that a cop-out? Sure it is. But it's a way to try to get your point of view out there. Remember, successful communications is that you control the message as much as possible. You try desperately not to have somebody else speak for you. And there are plenty of people out there that are more than happy to speak for you, including certainly your competitors, depending on what business you're in, your employees, in maybe a positive or a negative way. If they put a microphone or a camera in front of most people do not like to do that. But once you get comfortable with it, people love to talk to the media. That's just the way it is. I want to switch gears just for a second. And we talk a lot about this thing called public relations. What exactly is that, or what's regarded as PR? You can find it in basically any university, college, private technical college, et cetera, all over the country, some type of a course called communications or public relations. One thing that we forget, what exactly is it? The public part is you are speaking to what publics are, and again, just try not to bore you too much with just public, with intro to public relations. But the public part is the audience. Each one of your businesses, myself included, has specific, what we call publics. That's what it means. What they are groups of individuals that you're trying to communicate with. It could be the media, could be a public. If you're in the insurance business, it could be particular types of insurance or customers. If you're in manufacturing, it could be your clients, it could be your workforce, et cetera, et cetera. We have to remember that each one of those is a separate entity. You can have multiple publics, but you try to focus your communication that best addresses those people. Also, please remember, public relations is a planned program. It's not just a fly-by-night thing. A lot of times, myself included, we forget you are large or small companies, you are trying desperately to communicate to somebody. And it has to be some type of a planned approach. We want to do this then, we want to do this then, we want to try to do this then, et cetera, et cetera. It has to be very flexible because things change at the drop of a hat. Every public is important, but you have to decide which publics for you are the most important. Why do I say that? Communication models and all communications, you're working to communicate to what we call the middle. The middle, if you go out on a whiteboard, or in my day it was a whiteboard, now a computer screen, and you go 0 on one side, 100 on the other, and that's the percentage. So you're at 0%, 100%. Statistically, about the first 30+%, maybe even much as 40% from the 0 is on one end of the spectrum. The 100 subtracting is on the other end of the spectrum. You try to communicate and influence to that middle percentage. Why? Because now are there exceptions? Absolutely. But statistically, and the best example, although we're very tired of it, is politics. Politics obviously heats up. Well, it never stops anymore. But every time we have an election on a national scale, it's the news, period. Successful communicators realize that the 0% up to 40-ish%, they are on one particular side of the aisle. Let's say they support candidate A. The other side supports candidate B. There's absolutely nothing, virtually nothing you can do to make sure that your message is even received. It won't even be, they may listen, but they're not going to take that particular case. So the big advertisers of the world understand that. The big communications companies understand that. They still communicate to those, but if they're spending ad dollars, the dollars are minimal. You try to focus on that middle where they will at least give you the time of day. At Domtar, we were not really a retail establishment, although we did sell many products. Most of the products Domtar sold and sells go through a chain of marketers. But every bit of their advertising focused specifically on that middle ground, whether it be somebody that needs office paper, whether they need adult incontinent products, they need baby diapers. They knew to try to get into that market. Now, I know that's more advertising than communication, but everything is together. The marketing, public relations, communications textbooks of 2021 talk specifically about integrated communications. Integrated simply means that you are taking bits and pieces, whether it's paid advertising, mouth-to-mouth communication, you name it. Everything works together to get a successful communication tool and get it out there. Feedback, feedback, feedback. Did I say feedback? What is feedback? Feedback is making sure, trying at all possible to see if your message has been received and how it's been received by the people you're trying to communicate to. If you're like I said, any type of a business, first of all, you need to package your communication in a form that they will actually read it. And more than read it, they'll understand it. And the only way that you can know that is feedback. Feedback is scary. Most companies, if you work, I had the pleasure of working with speech writing type things and communications with very high ranking people in organizations, CEO level type people. Do they like feedback? They do. I can tell you, they do not like feedback. They would just as soon you not tell them what the real story is, but you're not doing your job as a communicator. You need to know what the people are saying about you, or you just cannot be effective. A main point that I also like to bring up, especially when I talk to students that are new into the communication world, is what we call as noise. Now, this doesn't work very well. My example always was a radio that you try to tune it and you just kind of keep moving the dial just enough. Oh, there's the signal. You know, you get kind of that static type thing or interference. Remember, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but we all are being bombarded by it. It's something to the matter of, it's like 10,000 messages an hour that bombard us. I always think about it when you're driving down the interstate. Now, I know you're all good drivers. You all drive the speed limit. You all pay attention. Pause. But just think of how much distraction, even if it's just yourself in a vehicle. You may have the music playing, you may have whatever on, your phone is in there, it may ring, you have a gazillion billboards. Everything all that noise affects your communication. The best way to teach noise and its effect on communication is go to a major manufacturing facility and take two people and have them try to talk to each other when you have loud noise in the background. That's how you can really test your information and how communication really works. I want to talk a little bit about crisis communication, and I have a couple examples, and then also a little bit about the future, what IABC, International Association of Business Communicators, is saying are the trends. And then as we get through that, then we'll open it up and I know you're getting tired of watching my white hair talk at you, but I appreciate you being with us this morning. There are really four types. There's really four things, and again, almost summarized here. When I say crisis communication, what am I talking about? We all have crises every day. We all get halfway to work or something happens, you're like, oh, I forgot that at home. I did whatever. Those are crises. What I'm talking about here are probably on more of a broader scale. And there is a lot of information out there, and actually a lot of universities and a lot of schools teach crisis communication. It's how do you respond to a situation? Again, the crisis definition is it's an unplanned event, something completely out of the norm. The sad part is it's the terrible things that go on every day in our world that we can't control, but they do make the front page of the newspapers all over. There's really two types. One is more of, I call it kind of machinery driven. That would be the things like the God forbids of like an airplane disaster, etc. And then the other ones I call socio-political. That's kind of a crazy made up word. Those are the ones that impact the people. What's going on in Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera. Now you can write a book on crisis communication in Hollywood, But that'll be another that'll be another breakfast talk at some point. Really, the four things that communicators try to do when it's a crisis is, first of all, you tell the truth. Absolutely. But please let me be honest. You tell the truth as people ask you the truth. Does that mean that you give every little bit of information? Let's say you're in healthcare. You're under very strict federal and state guidelines of what you can communicate. HIPAA rules for short. But you notice how the communicators for the medical facilities in our region especially do a very good job. They do tell the truth, but they only tell what's asked. In heavy manufacturing, in a real bad situation, a terrible situation, you tell it to the point that you can tell it. But you try to train yourself to respond to what you're asked. The second part is we try to tell it fast. Now, fast, what is fast? It means you try to get your face out there to say, at least to the public, that yes, we know we're dealing with something here, but we know what's going on. We're trying desperately to work on it, and we will communicate as much as we can right now. You make kind of what's called an initial statement. It may not say much. It may be 2 to 3 sentences, but it basically says, I'm John Smith. I represent ABC Corp. Yes, we're dealing with a crisis situation this morning. We have our top people working on it, and I'll be back with more information. But you have to come back. The third point, you update people as they feel they need to be updated. What does that mean? It means you update people, and if you say I'm going to talk to you at 10 a.m. Central Time, you talk to them at 10 a.m. Central Time. What's happened over the years is that people have just decided not to do that, and you immediately then run back to that no comment mess. People want information. Do people have a right to all the information? My opinion, they absolutely don't. But you try to desperately get your face out there. And before all this starts, you try to be a good corporate citizen. Corporate in this case does not mean big manufacturing, doesn't mean corporation. It means everything. It means a one-person shop. It means Google, Yahoo, Microsoft. What you try to do is you try to run your business, if at all possible, is in the best manner as possible. And not that you want pats on the back, but but through your behavior, you earn pats on the back. Why is that important? In crisis communication, statistically, I've talked to many people talking about many situations, and they'll say, oh, that was ABC, I'm obviously making this up, the company, it's ABC company. Well, you know what? They helped my dad do such and such. Why don't I at least give them the benefit of the doubt? I may not like what's going on, but you tried. You do it to get pats on the back. You don't, but it's running your business the way it should be run, where when a crisis happens, and I'm talking specifically communication, you can then at least, you have some people out there that will at least give you the time, at least give you a chance to explain yourself. I have the top 10 best examples of, and they go from, actually the best one is way back in '82. I'm not going to read all of these, but 40, we're coming up on 40 years. If you look at any publication to this day, they'll say, what is the best way that crisis communications was handled? What specific incident? Excuse me. And it goes back to Johnson & Johnson. It's the Tylenol scandal. Years ago, just quick background. Tylenol, back in the day, now if you notice, you buy an over-the-counter medication like Tylenol, like any over-the-counter medication, it's usually triple sealed. It has some type of a coat, something that you pull off. It has a top that's, you literally can't open it, and then it has a seal around it. I can remember days when you'd go to the store and you'd buy Tylenol and you just opened it up and looked at, oh, yep, that's Tylenol. That's great. If you remember back in 1982, Tylenol was laced with poison. I'm not going to get into all the details, but they had, that was a terrible situation. Tylenol, what did Tylenol do? Tylenol's corporate management said, well, it's not our fault. We did not do anything to tamper with our product. Somebody tampered with it, but it's our product. We take complete responsibility. So what did they do? They literally stopped production. They took Tylenol off the shelves, and they lost market share like crazy. If you remember, Tylenol was the first Bayer aspirin type, non-aspirin product that was just now on the market. They were losing market share like crazy, but they made the bold and unprecedented communications decision to say, get out there and say it's not our fault, but we take complete responsibility. Now, we've heard that from many people. In this case, they did take complete responsibility. What happened? Their sales plummeted. They lost millions and millions of dollars. But what happened? As they made it through, people kind of said, hey, they handled that extremely well. And now Tylenol continues to be one of the most, just a solid product in the marketplace, the one that you can buy Tylenol, with acetaminophen, all kinds of different names, but Tylenol is still the leader. And it goes back almost 40 years ago. Any class you take, they will say that is still the way to do that. One other one I want, and there's a lot of different ones, but the other one I want to talk about is Pepsi. If you can remember, it's the syringes of all things. Pepsi syringes that ended up in Pepsi cans. What would happen was that people actually, because they wanted to just literally ruin Pepsi and ruin its market, they would literally open a Pepsi can and put a syringe in it and then go up to the counter and say, hey, look what I found in my Pepsi can. Again, did Pepsi do that? Of course not. Pepsi took kind of the Tylenol approach, and Pepsi said, we're going to get to the bottom of this. They ended some production. They took complete trust in their public, but they took complete, they said, hey, it's our product, we stand behind it. That's what Pepsi did. Is that practical? In some cases it's not, but those are still standards by what happens out there in crisis communication. I have one thing I want to say too about COVID. We're all tired of COVID-19, obviously. Is it a very tough topic? Yes, it continues to be. It's probably the most communicated topic, or certainly of the last year. It will continue. We'll probably be talking about it 5 or 10 years from now. I hope not, but we do. The number one trend that International Association of Business Communicators, in a huge study they did, and again, all based on study, was their first trend that they're going to see, and as we move through 2021 into 2022, and I'm going to read it right to you. It's by Mike Klein. Give him some credit. He's from IABC. In the wake of COVID-19, the workplace is emerging as the differentiator for employees. That's exactly going back to what I talked about earlier. How do we communicate to either our employees or customers, etc., when we may not have physically an office to go to? I never thought that would be a big deal, so to speak, but it's a huge deal. I know some organizations that I know people that work for, if they have 10 or 15% of their workforce back in their main headquarters, that's a lot right now. And they're finding it extremely difficult to communicate. Excuse me. So what I'd like to do, I know I've rambled on, sorry, I'm kind of a rambling guy, but I'd like to, Angel, I'm open it up. Do we have any? I saw a few things flash by, but I can see your nice smiling face, so that's good.
Yeah, so I don't see any comments in the chat right now for you as I'm looking, but I'd like to, as Craig said, let's open up the floor for discussion. So why don't I kick it off? I always like to be the first one, right, to dive in. So you talked a lot about communication and how it's impacting us. When we're talking about, bad public relations, right? Something happens, you just talked about Pepsi and those items. I always hear the comment, take the high road, right? So you touched a little bit on that. Can you give us maybe some advice in any situation on how important it is to take that high road? I know you touched on it a little bit, but dive into it a little bit more. I know with, as you said, COVID and those items, it's really easy for people to feel personally attacked and to kind of jump in and want to defend themselves. But can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to take that high road?
Yeah, extremely difficult. I understand, because you made an excellent point, Angel. It has gone from communication. It's absolutely personal right now. It isn't, we disagree with you. It's a personal attack. I know people that have turned off lots of things, meetings, just because it's like, we can't do this anymore because it is a personal attack. And when I say take the high road, or, that type of a thing, that's very difficult to do. But I can tell you that you gain the respect even of your quote unquote enemies, if not the right word. I talked to a couple people during the last presidential election, and again, you could talk about that for the next 3 days. And they're on both sides. One was on one side, one was on the other side, and they both made the same comment. They said, we support a certain person. Why can't somebody tell us what they believe, and actually that's what they do? And that to me is kind of an offshoot of taking the high road. It's very difficult. Let's put it in a company perspective. A company says, yes, you may not come back for our products, but to us, this is what's right, and we're sticking to it. Very hard. And you earn the respect of people, and you'll have people that will say, you know what, I totally disagree with them, but at least they stick to what they believe in. Very difficult. I talked about crisis situations, that's when everything just gets kind of thrown out the window. But if you can at least have with your key people the reputation of taking the high road, or being, kind of being above, at least telling the truth, you at least can have a chance to get in the game. Let me talk, I just thought of a little bit about technology. And again, this was back in the day of telephones. There was an airline disaster, and the company did a wonderful job of setting up a station where people could literally call in and talk to a live person to get an update. For example, somebody somebody's parents in a different part of the world could call a number that they only knew, an 800 number, and they'd call, and they literally had a phone bank in a room, probably where like I am, and people would answer and say, here's the latest up-to-date information, just for them. What happens? Someone in the media, and I'm not kicking the media, but someone in the media somehow found the 800 number, published it. Their beautiful way to communicate to people was totally destroyed because people could not get in. The phones were busy 24/7 because everyone was calling it. What did the company do? They ran a front page ad in every newspaper. That was back when newspaper was probably a primary, that said, we're sorry, this is what we tried to do. They didn't throw the media under the bus. They had the right to do that. And that particular airline is still very profitable today.
Great, thank you. Again, let's open it up for discussion. If you'd like to ask Craig a question, please unmute yourself. If you don't want to unmute yourself, you can certainly put that in the chat. We have about 15 minutes, so if somebody has a question, I'd like to cue that in.
I'd like to, hi, can you all hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was, you were talking about JetBlue, I think, when over 130,000 of their customers got stranded at JFK.
Yes.
And, you know, I did a study on that, and the cool thing about that was that the CEO owned it. He said, we dropped the ball, you know, and he approached it as an ecosystem, and they broke that down into every stakeholder that makes up that ecosystem, and the communication that they had was broken down specifically to each one of their stakeholders. And you know, so in my opinion, the gentleman did an awesome job. Yeah, they lost a few $1 million, but the way they handled it and the way they communicated, and you know, also the way that internally, how the drive was internally. It wasn't driven from the outside with the market and responding to the outside. It was, okay, this is who we are, this is what we believe in, and this is how we're going to go about it. So that in my opinion, the gentleman and his leadership team handled it correctly, because it was, the messaging was from the heart, and the messaging was for every stakeholder that was affected by that. You know, another thing that you hit on, Mr. Tim, is, you know, COVID. And yes, we are tired of hearing about it, and hopefully it'll go away. But, you know, you did mention you know, the conversations about COVID will be ongoing. The ramifications that COVID has had on every aspect of our lives is going to be around for a little while, you know. And so when in a previous chapter, every business has a business continuity plan, right? So when this happens, this is what you fall back on. And because COVID was it was volatile, there was a lot of unknown, you know, it was complex, and there was a lot of ambiguity as well. You know, there was, our fears had fears, you know, we were facing issues that we had never faced before. And so when this company fell back on its business continuity plan, there was nothing there for it. And so a lot of the messaging that came from the top was just very black and white, you know, no emotion, not taken into consideration, you know, that there's folks out in the field, or there's folks in the stores. And so, you know, communication is so important. And a lot of businesses dropped the ball when they were communicating to their most important aspect of their company, which is their employees.
I really appreciate your comments. And yes, I think JetBlue, I mean, it's the newer age example of how they hit it out of the park, and they couldn't control it. They can't control the weather. I mean, it's just, they can't. But you brought up an excellent point, and a lot of excellent points. And it's kind of sad, because we're kind of in a what have you done for me lately society. It's like, yeah, I've been your customer forever, but you know, it's that one thing that just kind of throws it off. And on the very negative side, if you really want to read how not to be crisis communication, look at some of the Exxon Valdez and those real tragic oil spills up in the Alaskan area. And you'll find that actually the CEO, who was in that case was from a different country, was quoted as saying, I just wish this would get over with so I can get back to my life. And that gets broadcast all over the world. And you're just like, wow, it's completely opposite what you just said. You're talking about not owning it. And I honestly, I'll tell students and anyone that'll listen, I don't know how anyone, I know obviously if you're the chief executive officer, there's obviously reasons why that's, those are good jobs. So, those are good jobs. But if you're the CEO of a major airline, how do you ever sleep? Because you go to bed thinking, well, we're doing well, but what's going to happen? Because it's like any position, but in an airline, especially, it just seems like everything just absolutely, is intensified. And it's very difficult, I guess. But hey, I really appreciate your comments. My opinion, you're right. You're right on the money.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was great. Alex did share the link in the chat. And then for those that are watching the recording, I will include that link to that specific study and information, along with a few other links that Craig has kind of talked about as resources. So I'll include all of that, of course. But again, want to still open it. We still have about 9 minutes left. Are there any additional questions for Craig's or general statements?
I guess maybe I could ask a question if anyone, I guess, what are you, again, as we move, again, I don't want to focus that much on COVID, but what has changed? Maybe if anyone could give us a little background, and you don't even need to name the business unless you're comfortable, kind of what has changed, if anything, with the way maybe your management communicates with your employees, or how you communicate with your employees in kind of this, and I keep saying post-COVID world, but I don't think it's post yet. I wish it was, but it's anyone that would, I'd just be curious if anyone would want to share any tidbits, and we all kind of learn from each other.
Yeah, I'll share something. I'm David Farnborough. I am a Remax realtor, and I also manage an office. And what's changed for us is that we used to have in-person meetings every week. Now we have Zoom meetings every week, because we used to have to drive from wherever we were to get to these meetings and then drive back afterwards. And we've just discovered that we don't actually need to be together in the same building. It also means that people who wouldn't have attended those in-person meetings can now be there. So that's a huge culture change.
Has it, and have you seen any negatives for that, or has it been more positive? I'm just curious.
Yeah, the only negative I think is that you do miss some of the body language when you're talking on Zoom via being in the same place. You don't get up and shake someone's hand, although maybe we don't do that now anyway because of COVID.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Anyone else like to share? Just more curious than anything else.
I can chime in. My name's Samantha and I work for SC Soderski, and I head the marketing department. And I guess very similar to the realtor is that we used to have in-person meetings every single week, and now we have Zoom meetings. And I guess the most challenging thing with that is the fact that we work in marketing. So there's 4 people on our team, and we're very creative. So we bounce ideas off of each other, and we kind of do that whole thing. And that experience has changed drastically for us due to the fact that we can't bounce ideas off of each other. It's much harder on Zoom. Someone's camera is lagging from wherever they are. And I just think that that's a really challenging piece that we've had to overcome. So we've kind of been trying out different platforms and trying different areas of their house versus the office to see if there's different ways that we can make the camera not lag, and just other ways to bounce ideas off of each other. So I guess that would be the most challenging piece. But other than that, things have been really well. We found out that a lot of people, we also rent commercial space. A lot of our tenants in our commercial spaces at offices have given notice due to the fact that everyone can work from home now. So trying to find people to refill those commercial spaces has also been a little bit challenging.
Oh, thank you very much. When you mentioned about the creative part, it just, I tell people I have all this useless trivia up in this little tiny brain of mine, but now that I'm going to tell you some useless trivia, now I can get that out of there, get some more room in there. You've all probably have heard of Aflac. Aflac company, who is really turned into the world leader in insurance for specific situations, cancer, that type of a thing. If you ever want to, and I can't cite you where it is, but if you ever want to see an interesting talk about creativity, how Aflac was actually Aflac, the CEO of Aflac told they needed to do something to kind of get, you know, it's an insurance company based in Georgia. We need something to kind of make us a little more pizzazz, but again, also not taking away from a very important insurance product. So he actually gave the go ahead to this an ad agency to say just run with it. But the only stipulation was he has the last say on whether to use it or not. And the story is that two of the creative people actually they said, boy, they were trying to figure out what to do. And they said, what do we do with this thing called Aflac? So they actually said, let's go to lunch. And they're walking in whatever city in the country. And he kept saying Aflac, 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 Aflac. And after he kind of would say it in a different way, it sounded like the guy says, you sound like a duck. We've all seen the Aflac duck on commercials. You don't even need to run Aflac, the name, anymore. Believe it or not, that's how Aflac became Aflac. And they went for it, and it didn't cheapen their product, but it's just, and so again, I know Zoom has been very good for the travel part of it, but you need to somehow keep that creativity like you just mentioned.
Great. Does anybody else want to take a moment to respond to Craig at all or ask a question? Well, great then. Well, thank you again, everyone, for attending today. Thank you to Craig for a great presentation and Victor Communications for sponsoring today's event. As a reminder, I see somebody has their hand up.
Sure.
Oh, no, he said no. Oh, round of applause. Sorry, I couldn't see it. Again, I will follow up with the recording just in case you want to recap the information. I'll also send a few of the links that Craig referred to during this session as a follow-up. Again, thank you everyone so much for being here today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
And I'm more than happy to, if you have any comments or anything, just feel free to reach out. It's just, I love to talk to people about communication and would love to share anything. If I can help you, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective, Craig. You're just